Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Voices of Misery podcast. I am very delighted because today, guys know how I like to talk about COVID and I like to talk about all the things going on with the world today and just how crazy we're going down this weird dark path. But lately, it seems like there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And I know a lot of people are anxious to get back out there in the real world, but I don't want you guys to think that everything's over. And just to prove my point that I think that we are going to go right back on down this hellish hole of despair and control, I brought a guy in that I think is going to be a very good expert, very good voice of reason, and just a voice you guys need to hear. And he's an author of an amazing book. His name is Nick Corbishley, and oh my goodness, he has a great book about something that really freaks me out, and that is the vaccine passports. Nick, I'm gonna let you take it away here because no one can explain it better than you, sir. How are you? And can you please introduce yourself to the Voices of Misery listeners out there?
Yeah, no, that's a good note. Thanks for having me on. I've the book came out last week on Thursday. It's called Scanned: Why Vaccine Passports and Digital Identity Will Mean the End of Privacy and Personal Freedom. And it seems to be selling quite well on Amazon and other places. It's a book that I started writing in I think it was like end of September, when I was just really recovering from COVID myself, ironically. And I wrote it in about 3 months, so it was record time. I've never written a book before. I've been writing articles for various websites and blogs, mainly on the financial and economic area. But the interesting thing is that by the time we got to finishing the book, half of the situations we described in the book had changed. So I mean, it was a really difficult book to write because of the incredible volatility and just the speed of change that was going on around us. So when I started writing the book, we were in the middle of the Delta wave. When I finished the book, we were in the middle of the Omicron wave. And a lot of the way people were thinking about COVID had changed. Even those people who were extremely in favor of virtually all the restrictions were beginning to maybe see certain issues with the vaccines, for example. So it's been an adventure. It's been a roller coaster ride. And here I am. I've done up until a month ago, I'd never done any interviews on podcasts or radio. And now I've done something like 11 in the space of a month, including on the Russell Brand show, which has had more than 1 million viewers. So yes, it's been a hell of a journey, and the journey is continuing. The roller coaster ride is continuing because, as you said, we're being told that things are going to get better, and we're moving out of the pandemic, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but there are elements to that story that are not true. And I'm here to tell you what those elements are.
And I can't wait to get into it. But before we get into all this stuff, because there's a lot of meat and potatoes here we're going to jump into as far as the vaccines, the mandates, and everything like that in between, I must ask you, Nick, where are you from? Because that accent is just amazing.
I'm British, born and bred, born in Wales, brought up in England of English parents. But I've been in Barcelona for the last 21 years. My wife is Mexican. And yeah, we're considering about maybe moving to Mexico in the next 6 to 9 months as well. So I think that my accent is strange because it's kind of like, it's this mixture of influences. And if I speak in Spanish, it's exactly the same thing. I mean, people cannot place me. I've got elements of Mexican, I've got elements of Spanish from Spain, I've got elements from Argentina. So it's a weird little mix of influences.
I absolutely love it. It's a very pleasant sound, and I'm very happy that you're here on the show because I have a lot of questions. And I've been one of the guys who was against the mandates from day one. I was against 15 days of slow to spread. I was against everything. I mean, just initially when this whole thing started, I was at work one day and they were like, yeah, we're just closing up and we're going home. Like, what's going on? I said, yeah, there's this thing called COVID-19. It's it's tearing up there. Everybody's getting sick and people are dying. And I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, where did you get this information? And why am I hearing it from my boss for the first time? I didn't see it on the news or anything. I go home. I tell my wife, like, what the heck's going on? She's watching TV. Everyone's freaking out. So of course it was panic in the beginning for maybe the first couple of days until you get to sit down and kind of spend some time with yourself and assess the situation and just kind of get some viewpoints from just your experiences with the media and whatnot. I wanted to ask you, what was your initial perception of what was going on when the world kind of turned a couple of years back with COVID?
I mean, it was a very strange experience. I remember the first time hearing about this virus. I was in a bar with three friends of mine, one British friend and two Spanish friends. And this British friend suddenly said, have you heard about the virus in China? And this must have been in, I would say, mid-January. So it was pretty early. And we didn't really talk about it much. After that, I did a little bit of looking into it, and it did seem quite serious. I mean, I remember when, because I mean, I work in economics and finance more than anything else. And I remember seeing when China began shutting down Wuhan and other parts of the country, and thinking, wow, that's serious. I mean, and that's huge. That is like the second biggest economy is closing down. And I remember the stock markets just kind of like continuing to rise in the West, and everybody kind of ignoring it. And I was telling certain people, so I was saying, like, I think we're going to start seeing some serious volatility in the market. This doesn't look good. And they kind of ignored me, and the markets just kept going up and up and I remember the weekend when this happened, Italy, suddenly stories started coming out about northern Italy and how there were little kind of like explosions of cases in towns and villages in northern Italy around Milan. And the Monday after that, the stock markets began kind of like collapsing. And that was, for me, that was kind of like the beginning of COVID-19, even though it was like 3 weeks before we got locked down in Spain. It was the moment where it kind of like, I realized we are entering a new phase of our lives. I didn't, for the life of me, expect that we would see almost every country in the kind of advanced world or advanced economies getting locked down. I mean, let's face it, up until that experience, the idea of a lockdown, I mean, I'd not really heard that expression before. I mean, and as far as I'm aware, it was kind of an expression that they used in prisons. No, I mean, like, it's something that you lock down a prison when there's been some serious problems, there's been a riot or something, you lock down, you take away the privileges of the prisoners. And for me, the idea, this expression lockdown, it just came out of nowhere. In Spain, we call it confinement, confinamiento, which is an expression that I'm more familiar with. But everything was new. Everything was absolutely brand spanking new. And like you said, I think at the very beginning, for me, it was in the initial weeks, we were in a state of shock. And I remember the day the lockdowns began, I lost 50% of my income in one day, because 3 of my clients just told me, we don't need you anymore. And it was staggering to suddenly find that you in one day. I mean, I'm used to this, if you're freelance, you're used to kind of like losing clients and gaining clients. And I always, put a lot of emphasis on diversifying my risk by having as many clients as possible. But I lost 3 of my 6 major clients that day. And one of those clients I'd been working for 12 years. And I was basically let go over a WhatsApp. And my wife, on the same day, she got furloughed. So, I mean, like, we were in a position where, we lost around about 55% of our income in one day. So it was absolutely staggering. At the same time, my mother-in-law had just arrived from Mexico to visit us. So, I mean, with her usual sense of timing. And so she was locked down with us. So I was locked down with a lot less money than I need to survive, and with my mother-in-law in the bedroom next door. So
Jeez.
it was all an interesting experience. So I mean, like, I think that at the very beginning we were just I was very much I would say afraid of the virus. Um, I because of what I'd read about what was happening in China, and I my wife and I got masks ironically before anybody else. We in Barcelona we ran out of masks very early on because many of the Chinese residents bought all the masks from the pharmacies and they sent them to their families in China. So we were among the only people we knew who had masks. Because I'm somebody who just basically thinks, look, if something's going to happen, it's best to take certain precautions
Sure.
just to be on the safe side.
That makes
So we bought
sense.
some very good masks. And um, and yeah, we were, I think that after maybe a month of being locked down, I started to think more deeply and started to research more deeply into what was going on. I think it's taken a long time to begin to realize, to put certain pieces together and to realize what kind of experience we're actually being put through. And the continuation of that experience, because now that we're being told that things are getting better, we, I mean, like, let me put it this way. I remember the first 2-3 months, the messaging in so many media channels was, we are never going back to normal again. And
Yes.
that, you know, we even had this creation of this expression, the new normal. And this was for a brief period of time, this was kind of like shoved down our throats. This was repeated endlessly, almost like on a loop. And then it's weird because, like, when we're now at this phase, we never hear expressions about new normal. We're actually being told we are going back to normal.
Yeah.
Whereas the reality, in my view, is the absolute opposite. We're going back to a completely different reality, unless we are very careful
You're
and
right.
very vigilant about where we're being led.
Well, that's because they saw the polling numbers, and the polling numbers, when you say things are going back to normal, actually polls better than as opposed to saying we're never going back to normal. I feel, I mean, that's just me being myself here, just not really trusting the government. And November is just
Yeah,
around the corner, and they've been getting hammered, at least here in the United States, on their whole messaging. So I'm with you there. I agree.
I mean, I think that there's certainly an element of that. In France, the President Macron, I think it was last week, he kind of, like, you know, France is one of the places where they had the strictest restrictions for the vaccine passports. It
Yes.
was
Yep.
an absolute nightmare, and they just kind of like said that they're suspending almost all the restrictions. And this is just conveniently a month before the presidential elections. So in the UK, the UK, the English government, I mean, it gets complicated, but so many of the COVID rules are taking place on a kind of like national basis within the UK, which is really weird. So when I talk about the Boris Johnson government, it's the British government. But when it comes to the COVID rules, you have the English government, the Scottish government, the Welsh government, and the Northern Irish government. But the English government, Boris Johnson, it was the first government to really begin withdrawing a lot of the restrictions. And the irony in this case was they did it because they had been caught out
Mm-hmm.
breaking their own rules so many times that
Yes.
they were left with a choice. They were left with a choice. Either the rules go or they go. And I think that is kind of like, they made this cynical
Mm-hmm.
decision. Okay, we want to stay in our jobs and we probably don't want to face legal consequences. So we will begin to reopen society and begin to give back the privileges, because that's what they are now. We're not talking about rights, we're talking about privileges. And I think in most cases, I think it's very important that people realize this, we are suspending these rules. We are suspending the application of the vaccine passports at a domestic level. In almost all countries, that is the case. They're not canceling it, they're suspending it, which means at any given moment, they can be reactivated. If we have another resurgence of the virus or whatever, then they can very quickly reactivate many of these restrictions that they are suspending.
Absolutely horrifying when you put it in those words, because at any moment, just like you said, they can pull this thing up. And the thing that scares me the most is that so many people were so willingly going along with everything that they were told to do. And I understand the first 2 weeks, okay, I'll admit the first week of those 2 weeks of 15 days of slow to spread, I was a little nervous. We didn't leave the house. We stayed in the house. We played by the rules. And then, I'm my own worst enemy because I'm very stubborn. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing this. I'm sorry. I'm not doing it. So my reckoning came very early, just out of my own
Hmm.
stubbornness. So I want to
Hmm.
ask you, because you obviously wrote this amazing book that is extremely relevant to everything that's going on. When did it click for you, like maybe things aren't exactly as they appear?
When did it click? When I started seeing that the vaccine passports were definitely happening. So there was lots of talk about this in the first months of the pandemic, and they were saying we need certain. They were calling them immunity certificates, so they weren't actually calling them vaccine passports. But that was a little bit suspicious to me, because I've been writing about digital identity. I've been writing about biometric identifiers. I've been writing about the war against cash for 5 or 6 years. And so that kind of set off a few alarm bells when I started seeing the vaccine passport, immunity certificates, digital certificates, and also the way they were using the pandemic as a kind of as a way of intensifying the war against cash, which is something that has been ongoing for well over a decade.
Yeah.
So but when I saw in, I suppose it was like December and January, started hearing voices, people like Tony Blair, and you started seeing like World Economic Forum was beginning to talk about, the way out of this is with these vaccine passports. So we had the vaccine, and then within about a month after the rollout of the vaccines, it's like, okay, we have these vaccine passports. And that's when I started to be a little bit more suspicious. I saw the possibility how this could lead to something much darker. And that's when I started to research it. I started looking to what was happening in Israel from February, when they launched their Green Pass, and seeing the kind of levels of discrimination and segregation that they were unleashing. I then realized that was coming to me, because the European Union was going to do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Although ironically, the European Union, when they established their legislation for the Green Pass, so they called it exactly by the exact same name as the Israeli vaccine passport. They specified within the legislation that it could not be used in a discriminatory way against people who chose not to get vaccinated. I mean, this was within the same legislation. And then 2 to 3 weeks after that went live, that was in June 2021, you saw countries like France, Italy, Germany begin to use it in exceptionally discriminatory ways, and constantly escalating this kind of attack on civil liberties. So for me, it's kind of like how you promise something. Governments began to kind of say, yeah, we're going to do this, but don't worry, it's not going to lead to discrimination. And then 2 weeks later,
It does.
it's being used to ban people from sitting on a terrace in a bar or in a restaurant. So I mean, it's like realizing that there's no possible public health argument for justifying banning somebody who is unvaccinated from having a drink on a cafe terrace outdoors, because we knew by then that the possibility of spreading the virus outdoors is virtually nil.
Exactly.
I mean, we had a Mexican friend in Toulouse, in the south of France, who basically was kicked off her online program that she was doing, an online course, because she was unvaccinated. So I mean, you see these things happening. It's like there is no public health justification. This is punishment. This is about forcing people to comply, to obey. And that is a whole new system of existence. This is a whole new way of living with power, interacting with power. And yeah, by that point, I'd written, I think that by July, August, I'd written something like 3 or 4 articles in the US about what was happening in Europe. And that brought me to the attention of this American publisher called Chelsea Green, which is in Vermont. They've been publishing fantastic things for decades. And they're one of the few publishing houses, I would say, at least in the English-speaking world, that has been willing to kind of like to explore what has actually been happening with kind of like the pandemic, and getting off kind of like the well-trodden path and looking at some of the darker aspects. So I mean, I was approached by them, I think it was in July, at the end of July, and they said, you know, we've seen your articles, that we really like them. Would you be interested in expanding this into a book, into a short book? And I said, yeah, definitely. And then I came down with COVID 2 days later. So I mean, like, that's part of my roller coaster journey. Luckily, my mother-in-law had gone home about 2 months earlier. So I mean, like, my mother-in-law stayed with us for about 450 days in total.
Boy.
In an apartment with like 3 bedrooms, not the biggest apartment. But it was an interesting experience sharing that space with your mother-in-law for 450 days. And in the end, it was really good for us because it allowed us to financially get through this kind of shock to our income. So we were, but yes, it was not the perfect scenario.
Well, you did mention one thing that really, I feel like, goes under the radar that a lot of people are not catching. And you mentioned 3 words. You said war on cash. Now, I want to dig a little bit deeper into that because a lot of people are just not even paying attention. It feels like they're trying to erase the dollar so they can control it. And we're going to be moving to some digital currency. Not sure if that's my conspiratorial side or if there's any kind of truth to that. Just by watching the news and how easily they shut down, just Visa and MasterCard shut down all funds in Russia, and they said we're shut down all operations. They took away all the money. Can you imagine if the government said, I don't like the way you posted on social media, we're going to take away your funds, and just like that, you go from having money in the bank to having nothing? Is this a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's not just a possibility. I mean, this is something that they are telegraphing.
God.
I mean, like, not necessarily turning people off, so they wouldn't go that far as to say that, but so I mean, like, the pandemic was certainly taken advantage of by the kind of traditional, should we say, enemies of cash. So organizations like Visa and MasterCard, tech companies, banks, I mean, governments to a certain extent don't like cash. And they've been waging a kind of like an escalating conflict against it for, like I said, over 10 years. And one of the first things that happened in, I think it was like March, April, with kind of the economy, was a warning from the World Health Organization that maybe cash is an important vector in the transmission of COVID-19. And this was seized upon by the media. It was magnified. You know, these fears were magnified. And I think that had a huge impact in every country. So countries that were extremely cash friendly became a little bit less cash friendly. Countries that were already far down the path towards a kind of cashless existence went even further down that path. So I mean, the UK is a really good example. The UK is, many people don't use cash for anything in the UK, and that has certainly been the case since the pandemic began. So this had a kind of galvanizing effect. On top of that, we have almost 90 central banks on the planet currently experimenting with central bank digital currencies. So that's, if you look at those 90 central banks, those are the most important central banks on the planet, and many lesser central banks. But they include the Federal Reserve, they include the European Central Bank, they include the Bank of Japan, they include the Bank of England, they include the People's Bank of China, which has already launched its central bank digital currency, the digital yuan. but it's not kind of like nationwide, but they've got it. It's functioning in, I think it's something like 10 cities, and they're expanding it to more regions. So it's definitely something that people should be talking about. They should be aware of this, because this is how money functions, and how money functions always has an effect on how our lives function.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that central bank digital currencies will enable is much greater tracking and surveillance of our spending habits. So if you are somebody who is concerned about, wanting to maintain a certain anonymity, a certain privacy, then cash is one of the last bastions we have. And if a central bank digital currency comes into effect, which is looking increasingly likely, then the chances are that cash either will no longer exist, or it will be eroded away. Its use will be eroded away by, basically, I imagine, by incentivizing the use of the central bank digital currency and kind of like penalizing the use of cash. So I mean, I think that is something that is clearly on the agenda. It's going to happen. My guess is in the next 2 to 3 years. The technology exists. And I feel, I mean, like, this is only, I have no proof for this, but my personal feeling is that one of the reasons why regulators, financial regulators, and central banks and governments have been extremely lax with the launch of cryptocurrencies is because they've wanted to observe how they work, how they function. And for me, the fact that Bitcoin, we still don't know the founder of Bitcoin, we still don't know who created Bitcoin.
Exactly. There's so much.
The world's most important cryptocurrency that has, in many ways, it kind of revolutionized the way the economy works. We don't know who created it. That is a little bit suspicious to me. So, but I mean, I think that the fact, I think we've got 3 central bank digital currencies. So these are being referred to as CBDCs. We've got 3 that are currently in total operation. I think that one of them is in Nigeria, which is ironic given all the financial scams that happen in Nigeria. And the other 2, I think, are in the Caribbean, in some of the islands in the Caribbean. And like I said, China is a long way down the path. So I mean, like, the or Agustin Carstens, who is the president of the Bank of International Settlements, which is like the central bank of central banks. It's like the central bank that coordinates many of the things that happen between central banks. And he said at a conference, I think it was last year or the year before, he said that when we spend a dollar or we spend a peso, and I'm paraphrasing here, we have no idea what that money goes on, how that is spent. But when we have central bank digital currencies, we will have very clear idea, and we will have very clear control over how that money is over how that is done. So I mean, he wasn't actually saying we're going to control how you spend your money, but he was clearly saying we are going to have a very clear idea of exactly what you're spending it on. And in the UK, the Bank of England went further, and they were talking about programmable money. So they were talking about the central bank being given the power to essentially program money so that people cannot spend it on certain things if it's decided that it's not in their personal interest, which is very interesting to hear.
Oh my goodness.
To hear a central bank talking like this.
Absolutely
so
horrifying.
I mean, that is very scary. Because I mean, that what that means is, they can program money, not only in terms of just, how what it can be spent on it. They can program it in terms of how long it lasts. So if they start giving out, let's say, universal basic income, which I think is probably something that is coming our way as well.
They've been doing it in Canada. They've been doing it in
and they're
Canada.
doing
They're
it in
giving them like
Canada.
$2,000 a month, right? It's like
Exactly.
yeah,
They're launching it in Canada. So another thing they could do if they start giving out money, is they can make it time limited. So this can encourage you or almost force you to spend your money, not to save it.
yeah.
And at the same time, what they can do is they can put negative interest rates, and they can put negative interest rates quite low. So we've had negative interest rates in Europe for a number of years now, and it's not directly affected most people with bank accounts. It's certainly affected large companies with bank accounts. So if you've got if you're a multinational corporation, you've got money in the bank, then you may be paying a certain amount of interest for having money in the bank. It's a very strange concept.
It is very backwards.
It's very weird. It is absolutely. It goes against what it's almost like anti-natural, as they would say here in Spain. But I mean, like the possibilities, if you do away with cash and you only have central bank digital currencies, then there's nowhere where you can kind of like take your money to without, if they put negative interest rates on these accounts, then you're stuck with that. So it forces you to spend money. And I think that what is truly terrifying in a world where we only have digital money, in a world of pure digital money and no cash, your money is never yours.
Never.
Your money is always residing in a digital account somewhere, or is moving from one account to another account. But you will never ever say, look, I just want to have my money. No. And another thing that I think should concern us is that if we have bank runs in the future, then yeah, you won't be able to take your money out. Your money will be kind of like, if they decide to bail in your account, as the opposite of bail out. So if they decide to bail in the bank, should I say, then that means that they will be using the money of creditors, which can mean like bondholders, for example, shareholders, but it also could mean depositors. And in all the kind of like, in most jurisdictions, you have this limit of about $100,000 or 100,000 euros, 100,000 pounds, up to which point your money is guaranteed by the deposit insurance. But if you have more than that, then yeah, you could lose some of that money. And as we've seen in the last 2 years, government promises don't normally stack up to much. So even if they say, your 100,000 is completely safe, we don't know if that's necessarily true in the case of a kind of like a widespread bank run situation, as happened in, for example, Argentina in 2000, and I think it was 2001, 2002. So it is something that I really encourage people to keep a very close eye on, because I mean, like I think that there is this focus on the idea of having your account turned off, and I think that is the ultimate horror. I mean, like the idea
Tell me
of
about it.
you being divorced from the fruit of your work, because, as happened in Canada recently, you participated in a protest movement, or you simply donated certain funds to a protest movement that was legal in its day. I mean, like that is almost like the definition of arbitrary power. That is tyranny.
If you
And I
control
think that,
somebody's money, you control their minds, you control their bodies, and you will own nothing and like it. That's pretty much the mindset here.
yeah, I mean, I think that the shift of power from individuals to government and to central banks, because it's not just, I mean, I think we have to be very wary of just labeling this as something that's happening in government. This is happening at so many different levels of institutions. So I mean, government's playing an important role in this, but I mean, like, so too are supranational organizations like the World Health Organization. So too are central banks. And we, most normal people, they focus their rage, they focus their frustrations at the government, because it's the government you vote for. But ultimately, the central bank central banks have become massively powerful over the last 30 to 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they have had a huge impact on our financial situation. I mean, like the inflation we are living through right now, I mean, like they might try to tell us that it's all down to Putin and his war against Ukraine.
Yeah.
And that's madness. I mean, like the prime minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, tried that one a couple of weeks ago. It didn't go down very well. I think that Joe Biden has been saying the same thing. I mean, like it's incredible. I mean, for me, that is perhaps the most insulting thing they can try to do. It's just is literally insulting our intelligence.
But you know what? It's working. That's the sad thing. It's working. You see all the mainstream media outlets, they're all doing the work for them. They're all parroting the same exact narratives. And it's almost like they all get the same email sent out. They're all in the same email chain. Okay, these are the talking points tonight. It's all Putin. It's all Russia. It's not. This has been going on for a while. This inflation's been rising. I mean, even under the beloved Trump, a lot of the people are saying everything was so great under, which it was better. I'll take that over this any day. But he raised the debt as well. And then Biden's just taking it to a whole nother level. I mean, guy's an absolute idiot. It's horrifying.
Well, I mean, it's really about how much money is being created at the central bank level.
Okay.
And I mean, like that has been going up in Europe and in the United States ever since the global financial crisis. And what happened was when the pandemic hit, we went through the biggest creation of money at a global level ever experienced. And this was happening not just at the monetary level, but also at the fiscal level. So it wasn't just central banks creating money, it was also governments creating money. So I mean, like you started having kind of like these stimulus programs that allowed people to get very low interest rate loans, and you were getting money, people being given money essentially in the United States. So I mean, like what you actually had at that point was a huge amount of new money being created at the same time that the number of products and services circulating in the economy was much lower. Because we were going through lockdowns, we were just re-emerging from the lockdowns, and we had these huge imbalances. But I mean, like this has been baked into the cake since the kind of the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the bailouts that proceeded after that, both in Europe and the United States. I mean, most of the new money created, it's interesting, most of the new money created at the global level, at least by the central banks, was in Europe and the United States, was the European Central Bank and Federal Reserve. Their balance sheets increased enormously, almost doubled in the case of the European Central Bank in the space of 2 years. That's a staggering thing. And that is like the definition of inflation. So when they say to you, this is, it's all down to Putin, I mean, like, I hope people do have enough intelligence to realize when they're being lied to, but I don't know. I mean, like,
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I don't get my news from television. My wife and I we've not had a television for about 15 years. We get all our information, all our news from the internet. We read our news most of the time, because I think that's a much better way of processing information.
I believe so.
It's very dangerous to be just watching things all the time. I think listening is better than watching. And I think, like, for me, like whenever we go back to England to visit my family and we watch, we have to watch the BBC News. We have this cultural experience of watching the news again. It's so strange. It's so strange to see the levers they're pulling, the amount of fear they're creating, whether it's about, I don't know, a couple of days of snow that's coming our way. It's like, that wasn't like that 15, 20 years ago. I mean, we weren't terrified of snow. And now we suddenly are. It's like every single thing that could possibly happen is seen through a prism of fear. And yeah, I hope, I mean, but the scary thing is that we've kind of like, we've segued from a global pandemic to a a very serious war and a global economic crisis supposedly being caused by the war without skipping a beat.
It's
And
one to the
people are
next.
just, yeah, people are suffering, I think, mental whiplash. I myself, I spend, my job is to report on what is happening in the world. And I spend 10 hours, 11 hours a day doing that. And I find it more or less impossible to keep track of what's really happening because there's too much. We really don't know what's happening in Ukraine. It's really hard because of the fog of war, because of the amount of misinformation that's being circulated. And to a certain extent, the same is happening with COVID-19. It's really hard to keep track. So if you do a 10-hour a day job in a factory or in a shop or in an office or whatever, and you come home and you want to find out what's going on in the world, the simplest thing is just turn the news on.
Exactly.
And you watch it for 30 minutes and you think you are better informed as a result of that. And that's the scary thing, when a majority of people still operate in that way, then it's very easy to kind of like to keep a majority of the population completely misinformed about the most important things.
It's so crazy when you think about it, and they really did know how to play this to a T. I mean, they used people's compassion in the beginning, from the whole your mask protects me, my mask protects you, we're all in this together, everyone stay home, kumbaya, let's sing songs together. You had celebrities singing songs on Twitter, and people were just, oh, it was a heartwarming moment. And then all of a sudden they slowly started easing in. Basically, they were grooming us to the point where, okay, this is about us and each other and taking care of each other. And now you got to start doing this. And now the other side's the enemy. If you don't do as we say now, you're the bad guy.
Yeah, that is something that I think a segment of the population feels quite uncomfortable with. And that's where I get a little bit of hope. I think that there are, even among the people who are fully vaccinated, I think that there is a significant segment of that population who are uncomfortable with the idea of treating or othering the people who aren't vaccinated. I think that, and there's obviously a large segment of people who will absolutely go along with just about anything. But I think that there's a large segment of the population who are like, well, actually, my friend is unvaccinated and he's got some interesting arguments. He's a nice guy. My brother is unvaccinated, and I love him. He's my brother. I don't think that these descriptions of him dovetail with my experience of who he is. And I think that there's an element of that. And I think the fact that when Omicron came along, it just completely evaded the vaccines with incredible ease, to the extent that in certain countries and certain data suggest that people who are vaccinated are, that they have higher infection rates than people who are unvaccinated. Now that is the opposite of what a vaccine should do. That really is the opposite of what a vaccine should do. A vaccine, if it doesn't eliminate or eradicate the virus, it should at the very least significantly reduce the transmission. And if we are seeing,
nothing. It absolutely does nothing.
I mean, like, I think that there is still possibly an argument to be made that it may reduce your risk of serious symptoms, maybe.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit, but I mean, I feel like Omicron was the vaccine.
On the other side of the ledger, we are seeing that there are more and more potential side effects, potential adverse events. This is coming to light right now. At the same time, curiously, that we're all focused on what's happening in Ukraine. That to me is like the biggest story right now. Beyond, maybe not quite as big a story as possibly World War III, but just under that story, under that headline, World War III, then the release of data about the Pfizer vaccine from the FDA is absolutely ignored by the media. It's really staggering to watch. It is staggering to watch, and it is a reminder of just how important a role the mainstream media still plays in maintaining power structures. in the world today.
It's absolutely criminal.
Even though they're losing influence, they're losing readers, they're losing viewers, they still have an important role in setting kind of like the narrative. And unfortunately, there's still enough people who are kind of like who get all their information through the mainstream media channels.
I mean, the thing is, it's just quicker and easier for a lot of people. It's just easier to sit there and turn on the TV and just look at someone telling you exactly how to feel and how to think. It takes more effort to pick up a book and read and do research and listen to different voices and come up with your own opinion about things that are going on, is to just turn on the TV. And I feel like a lot of people are lazy and they played to that. Stay home and watch Netflix. I mean, they knew exactly what they were doing. I feel like this whole thing was a coup from the start. And just to get over here to your book real quick, because I know we have, like limited time here. And and your book Scan, it's all about, the vaccine passports. And I feel like a lot of people don't know exactly what that means, because so many people were lining up to do this in New York to get that Vax Pass Excelsior, and just to get back in life. They were beaten down to a point. They don't even know what they're signing up for. So I would like for you to take some time here and just elaborate. People, tell us what the vaccine passports even are and why we should be so afraid of this.
Okay, I mean, the vaccine passport is a form of digital identification that shows, I mean, it comes with a QR code that shows whether or not you've been vaccinated, or it confirms. In the case of Europe, it shows that there are 3 ways of qualifying for the vaccine passport. One is that you have you are fully vaccinated. Another way is that you've had a recent infection going back, I think, 6 months. So this distinguishes Europe from the US. So it's one positive about Europe, is that at least there's some recognition of kind of natural immunity. And the third one is if you've had a recent negative test. So this is how you qualify for a vaccine passport, at least here in Europe. And in the US, you have, I think it's like 21 states that have vaccine passport systems in operation. And that number is growing. I think that I read recently that there's another 3 or 4 that are on the verge of doing that, and which would mean that you're almost at half the number of states. And there are even rumors that red states are potentially going down that route as well. So this is the scary thing. So in vaccine passport, every country has had a different experience with it. It depends on the government in place, how much they really want to kind of to push it, how draconian they want to get with it. So I mean, in Italy for me is probably the worst case in Europe. It's absolutely terrifying what they've tried to do in Italy. And it doesn't surprise me to a certain extent, because Italy is a very important country in the European Union that they have to keep under control, because it has a very large economy that is in serious trouble, is heavily over indebted, and they've got a tendency, I mean, like they had quite a strongly right wing and a strongly left wing, curiously enough, this kind of mixture of populist governments in power 2 or 3 years ago, and they don't want to repeat that. So they have, at the moment, the Prime Minister of Italy is Mario Draghi, who is a former Goldman Sachs banker, who is the former president of the European Central Bank. So I mean, like, they have they've treated unvaccinated people like almost like prisoners of war. I mean, like they have banned them from being able to work. They have banned them from being able to get on a bus and go across town, or get on a train or the metro and go across town. So I mean, they have made the lives of people in Italy who are unvaccinated, who are not up to date with the vaccine, a living hell. I think that the last thing they did was that they've made vaccination mandatory for anybody over the age of 50. And if you're over the age of 50 and you are unvaccinated, you don't work, and you have to pay a fine to the government for not taking the vaccine. So I mean, like, each country's more, the experience depends, differs depending on each country. But the terrifying thing is that these vaccine passports allow the establishment of the infrastructure for digital identity, number one. They condition us to this idea of living in kind of like a digital checkpoint society. So where people just accept, okay, well, if I need to go to the gym, I just use my mobile phone to show who I am, and then I'm vaccinated, and that's okay. And I don't see it's not too much of an issue. The same, you know, if you go into the bar or restaurant, a lot of people just accept this. And the third thing about it is that it creates this this system of forced compliance. This idea that, you know, you've got to do what the government tells you to do to be able to survive in the most basic of ways. Yep. That is a whole different social contract to the one we are used to. That is the end of basic personal liberty. It is the end of privacy as well, because, you know, if these vaccine passports give way to the digital identity, which is pretty clearly what is happening, because governments are, you know, they are not admitting, you know, this isn't on the front pages of newspapers, but, you know, governments, if you research what governments are doing, they're all pushing ahead with digital identity programs.
Yep.
At the same time that they're saying we're getting rid of the vaccine passport. So what they're doing, they're expanding this while they're telling their public that, you know, this is in the past now. Don't worry, we're going back to normal. It's an incredible amount of cynicism, even for somebody who is used to incredible amounts of cynicism. It's shocking to me to see just how cynical government has become in terms of in the way they lie to their voters.
What do you think the end game is with all this? Because you got, I mean, the forced vaccinations, I never thought in my lifetime I would ever see a lockdown like, you know, for 2 years. I never thought I'd see people getting fired from their jobs for not getting a vaccination. I never thought I'd see our president basically go on TV and say, you know, this other half of the country is terrible, evil, unwashed, dirty people. They need to be, you know, ridiculed, and people on the news basically bringing it back to the segregational days where it's like, you know, they can't even go out shopping. They can't do this. They can't do that. Just the level of vitriol and hatred that I've seen over the past couple of years. I never thought this would ever happen in my lifetime, because I thought we were past all this, and it's self-inflicted, yeah, which is the worst part. Where do you see this going? What do you think the end game is here?
I mean, like, this is where you get into kind of like speculation. I mean, I think the end game is control. I think that we now live in a world where technology offers incredible amounts of incredible ways of controlling population, incredible ways of controlling behavior, incredible ways of tracking behaviors, incredible ways of kind of like forcing this kind of compliance. So I think that one of the reasons this is happening now is because quite simply the technology exists. And it has existed for some time, but it's kind of like they've needed the catalyst, the moment to be able to unleash these new technologies. And this is where the pandemic has come in. It's allowed them, it's given them the opportunity to put this into effect. And when people are terrified, when people are in a state of constant fear, they will accept just about anything and everything. When people have been alienated from each other, and I think that's one of the important things, is what the idea of mass formation that is coming into, you know, people are talking about this, the fact that we were completely disoriented, we were separated from each other, we were atomized, we were alienated, we were cut off from our loved ones. This is kind of like, this puts you into a psychological situation where you're willing to accept just about anything. And I think that has happened to a lot of people. People have accepted very dark ways of thinking. They've been encouraged, like you said, to resent, to despise, to mock, to ridicule other people because they chose not to get a vaccination. They chose not to take a medical product. That is, I mean, one thing I say in my book is any government that is willing to unleash hatred among a large part of the population, maybe the majority of the population against a minority of the population, that government will be willing to do it against any other minority, any other moment. And we've already seen this with the Russian situation. I mean, like the way they are mobilizing hatred of everything to do with Russia. I mean, to the point where, you know, you've got Tchaikovsky concerts being cancelled. Like, this is incredibly insane. This is a society that is losing its mind.
Yeah. Even UFC fighters were getting their fights canceled because they were Russian.
I mean, like, it's in the UK, you know, we've got the Wimbledon tennis competition coming up in the next few months, and I think like the #1 Russian tennis player was told, you know,
Djokovic, right?
No, not Djokovic. I can't remember his name.
No, he was the one that couldn't go because he wasn't vaccinated. Yeah.
Djokovic is the one who was unvaccinated, but this the #1 Russian tennis player was told, look, if you want to play at Wimbledon, you're going to have to denounce Putin. I mean, I'm not sure if they actually went this far, but they were talking about this as if it was completely normal. So this is madness. But this is how governments have always managed to rule. They've managed to rule because they've divided populations against each other. And the thing is that we are now living, I think, through one of these existential crises, you know, or maybe not existential, but one of these incredibly, what's the word? Incredibly tumultuous crises.
Okay.
Biden himself said that it's like every 3 or 4 generations, you know, we're seeing this new world system or new world order.
New world order. He said those words out of his mouth. New world order. Verbatim.
You know, even Biden was able to remember those 3 words and put them together in the right order, which I think is pretty impressive for the guy.
That's a feat for Biden.
That is a feat. But yeah, it is that kind of, when you see governments doing this, encouraging people to hate and dividing populations and polarizing, then this is not a good time to be on the wrong side of power. And that is what they want. You know, they want people afraid of stepping out of line. And the thing is, if we don't step out of line in enough numbers, then we are going to be moving into a society where we don't have any kind of civil liberties, we don't have any human rights, we don't have any privacy, we don't have any personal freedom. And I think that is the fundamental message of my book. You know, we are at this moment in history where we have to ask ourselves, what is my red line? Where do I say, okay, that is too far, that is going too far? And I was hoping that most people would be saying, well, you know, they want me to hate my brother because he's unvaccinated. They want to hate me to hate my friends because they're unvaccinated. Yeah. For a lot of people, that wasn't a red line. For some people, you know, it's the idea of vaccinating children as young as 5 years old. That to them is a red line, but for many others, it wasn't. So it's the question of, where is your red line? We need to be asking that question all the time, because we're being pushed further and further into a kind of like into an existence, into a system that is not going to be very pleasant for the vast majority of us.
Absolutely. And they saw how far they could push people, and it seems some people just have shorter fuses than others, and they got our bodies with the mandates. You know, they're going to get our minds with the social credit score. They're going to get our money with the getting rid of cash. It's like, what else is there? What are we going to be? A bunch of empty shells just walking around, barely making.
Well, I mean, I think that it kind of depends. It does depend on us. We still have, I think, a window of opportunity where people can make a difference. I think there are signs. I mean, people are having these discussions. The fact that you've got someone like Joe Rogan talking about these things, the fact you've got someone like Russell Brand talking about these things, the amount of vitriol that is unleashed against these people for actually providing space where these ideas can get attention. I mean, that shows that they are worried. And I do think that, you know, I do think that the Omicron has shown, you know, there are serious limitations to these vaccines. And a lot of people who had who maybe had 2 jabs caught Omicron and now saying, well, I'm not taking a third one. What is the point of taking a third one if it doesn't protect me from catching the thing?
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
think that those numbers are going up. So if you look at most countries, countries like Spain, I think that had 85% vaccination rate. And now it's kind of, if you're looking at the booster, you're looking at about 50, 55. I know people who are like saying, I'm not going to have any more. So I think that there are flaws to their plan. I think that there are little fragments of hope that we should certainly be focusing on. I'll give you one happy story before we leave. So I
Okay.
don't want everybody to think that I don't want to be just a pure voice of misery. So
Hey, that's my job.
exactly, it's a story about something that's happened in Spain recently, and I think it shows that if you club together enough people, and you can actually use um, technologies in your favor. So I mean, like what happened was Spain, as in so many countries in the West right now, has seen an absolute decimation of bank branches and ATMs. So I mean, like to the point where you have branches in Spain which don't even have cash. We have bank branches that don't even have cash. They don't offer cash services in branch. And this was basically a way of catering to kind of like the under 40s or the under 45 generation. The problem is like the people who were over 65, 70 were completely left out. They were completely lost. They don't know how to use mobile money.
Yeah.
A lot of them were struggling even just using the new ATM systems. So they kind of like, they reached the point where they said, we've had enough. And this one guy just set up a petition. He said, like, who agrees that we need to change this? And millions of people signed it. And the interesting thing, so I mean, the bank started to pay a little bit of attention, but when it got really interesting is when this movement began talking about stopping using credit cards and debit cards. And they said, we're going to, and they organized this through places like Telegram, through places like WhatsApp or whatever. They used the social media to get this message out. And the banks realized, oh my God, these are the people who have money in Spain. So like the elderly, the people over the age of 65, they're the ones who have capital, they have houses, they have money, they have pensions. The people under 30, they don't have much money. And they started bricking it. They started getting really scared.
Yeah.
And most of the banks have now said, okay, we're going to reintroduce cash services in the branches. We're going to help you navigate the new ATM systems. I mean, it's a little breadcrumb, but it shows that when you hit them where it hurts, which is their bottom line, they have to start listening. So I mean, that if the elderly in Spain can do something like this, then I think other people, especially younger people, can do more. The
I
only thing
think
that
so.
worries me, and I'm going to end with a slightly dark message, I fear that young people have very little understanding of even what privacy is and
Exactly.
what personal freedom is. I don't think they're in touch with these issues. They are more concerned about marketing themselves on social media, and that does concern me because generally in history, it's always the youngest generations that lead kind of like the fight back.
Exactly, and I'm there with you, Nick. I'm gonna be honest with you. This is one of the most enlightening conversations I've ever had here on the show, and I wish you weren't so busy because I can do this thing all night long, sir. I mean, oh my God, there's so many things to talk about, and I think you hit on Joe Rogan and Russell Brand, but there's people like you as well, and there's a lot of other people out there with smaller voices and just people writing books and things like that. And even us with this show now over the past year or two, we've been hitting on the COVID content a lot. And it just takes one, and then we all just kind of branch off and we all find each other and get the message out there because people need to hear this kind of stuff. So I want to thank you for coming on the show. And I want you to let everyone know where they can buy this amazing book and throw out some plugs.
Okay.
Where can people find you?
Yeah. So the book can be bought on Amazon. The name of the book, I'll repeat it, is Scanned: Why vaccine passports and digital identity will mean the end of privacy and personal freedom. It can also be bought at the publisher, which is chelseagreen.com. And if you want to see what I'm doing, I mean, like my personal blog is nickcorbishley.com. And my Twitter handle is Nick Corbishley.
Excellent, sir. I'm sure everyone will be buying that book because, oh my goodness, we have to do something. And I think your book's a great place to start.
I mean, one of the things I
survival.
say to people is like, if you are unvaccinated, buy this book for a vaccinated friend. And if you are vaccinated, read it. I think it's really important.
I hear it. Thank you, sir, for coming on the Voices of Misery podcast. You have a good night.
Well, thanks for having me, Ned. Okay.